evening. Good evening, Praise Chapel Fresno. I don't know what that was, but it scared me. But it's good to have everyone, no matter what you're tuning in on, no matter where you're tuning in at, just appreciative you're here with us this evening. Had a wonderful time with Pastor Randy Emerson. He wanted me to just kind of extend out to you guys a huge thank you for all that was going on this week, but for what the church blessed him with too. He was just really thankful for that. And just, in all honesty, this is my first time being a pastor and like not having to preach and bringing someone else down. And it's amazing how much I don't talk to him about things going on in the church or anything that I feel God wants to say to our church. And he just kind of comes in and in one weekend kind of knocks all the pins down. So I thought it was amazing. I really appreciated him coming down, but he was so appreciative of the church, of the response, and just what we've blessed him with. So he's a good friend of mine, but he's a good friend of Praise Chapel Fresno, and we'll definitely bring him back down sometime in the near future. So remember, you can continue to give to this ministry support through tithes, offerings, and love gifts. You can do that on Easy Tithe. You can download that on your iPhone or your smartphone, either on the iStore or Google Play. You can download it on your desktop computer. Go to easytithe.com. You can download it that way. You can also go to praisechapelfresno.com. Click Give on the toolbar. It's going to take you to a third-party website. You can give through there if you want a little bit more security. Or if you're joining us on our in-person services, we have tithes and offerings envelopes behind each and every one of our chairs with our tithes and offerings box located just outside the sanctuary. You can drop it off in there, and we'll make sure it gets deposited in a timely manner. So we're still going through these biblical bios, but something we're going to be doing different with our Bible studies is on Wednesday nights, and it's not going to be live casted. There might be some that we live cast, others that we don't, but what we want to do with our Wednesday nights is we still want to have Bible studies. I mean, I find it so important for the people of God to gather together and just rip the Bible apart and go through it. Making sure we have a full understanding of what it says, how to apply it to our lives. But for the first couple of weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to have a men's and a women's Bible study. Women's will be in one room, men's will be in the other, with our women's leader, Sylvia. She'll be handling that one. And then with our men's, it'll be Brother Ronnie, and also seconded by someone else to help him. That will be kind of doing this, and we're going to see where it goes. And we might change these up. We have a lot of ideas about things that we want to do with the church. That has to do with Bible studies, but I'm also very much intrigued into getting together and discussing marriages and communication in marriages, getting together and discussing, being entrepreneurial in the world, yet still, following our faith, different things that I really want to do that could enhance our lives all in general, but bring us closer together as a church, bring us closer together as a family. But just different things I want to do, because I've talked with some individuals outside of church where I've said, if you were to go to just like a Bible study, like what would you want to know about? What would you want to hear about? And surprisingly, there are a great amount of people that are like, well, I'd go to one if, I feel like me and my husband really need to know some deeper understanding of the marriage and all this, and we'd really like to go through that. Or it's communication with our kids, how to talk to kids about the things that are going on in this world. So we'll keep that up and around. Just keep posted to our social media. But for the first one starting, it'll be at 7:00. Men's and women's Bible study. We'll have refreshments here at the church, and they're not going to be long and lengthy Bible studies. No one wants to be out here till like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. So we'll make sure they're short. But look, it's something that's so important. And even now, as we're finding that there are people that are willing to ask questions, there are people that are willing to try to fight for their ideals and try to basically convince you of their ideals and saying that this is what's right. And it's not just happening in the world, it's happening in the church world. There's a lot of things that are being kind of preached and kind of taught that are not lining up biblically. And it's really important for us Christians to really know what's biblical, what isn't, what these people are preaching. Like, I want to keep that going, and the only way we can know that is not by sitting at home and watching YouTube, but by actually getting together, asking the questions that we need answered, going through the Bible, and bringing it out that way. So that's what we'll be doing with Wednesday nights. It'll start at 7 o'clock. In the first couple weeks, we'll do a men's and a women's Bible study. Husbands come with your wives, kids come with your parents. Like, we'll manage it. Don't worry about it. But that'll be starting in May. But stay tuned to our social media. That's where we'll kind of be putting it out. But today I'm still going through the biblical bios. Today we're going to be going through someone that a lot of people, I've kind of noticed a lot of people preach about her. They really deal a lot with this, and it's kind of campy, but I also found it pretty profound when I myself went through it. So we're going through Rahab. So Rahab, she's found in the book of Joshua. She's talked about in all of chapter 2, a little of chapter 3, and then she's mentioned in chapter 6. But she's a name that will become forever attached to the name and the lineage of Jesus Christ. She'll be honored several times in the New Testament by like Matthew, by Paul, and by James. They'll honor her simply because of what she's about to do. And all that we know very little about her from the book of Joshua, other than she's a prostitute. So if you think that's a little bit too mature of a thing to deal with the kiddies in the room, I'll give you a couple minutes to kind of get the kids out at this time, just so that we're not talking about something that you have to explain later to, let's say, a toddler, or something that you don't want to have to explain to them about what she was. We'll call her a harlot. But again, having to ask that kind of question or answer those questions when you're not expecting it. I didn't warn you, and we didn't have like parental advisory going up before that. But she lives in the city of Jericho, and it stands between Israel and the Promised Land. So Canaan Jericho is that town that's got the walls surrounding it, and Israel has to go through it. So her narrative starts with the death of Moses at first, and it's in Joshua 1, and Moses has died, and God calls upon Joshua. So they've been in the wilderness for this 40 years. He calls Joshua to lead Israel, and God tells Joshua, tell Israel to prepare themselves to cross the Jericho. So they go out, and he tells them, he gathers all of Israel together, and he says, look, prepare yourself for 3 days, then we're going to cross the Jericho. And I love kind of like their response when you read it in chapter 1. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to go, like, we're going to make sure that everybody's doing it, and if one of you disobeys, you're going to die. Because they just spent the last 40 years in the wilderness because they were disobedient. This is a new generation stepping into it, and they're like, we don't want to spend another 40 years out in the wilderness. We'll kill you if you disobey. Like, that's how serious it got there. And so they're out there and eating stale flatbread and pigeon meat, or it's quail meat, sorry. But this is where she comes into the story. And it's in Joshua 2, verse 1. It says, Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men as spies from Acacia Grove, saying, go out and scout the land, especially Jericho. So they left, and when they came to the house of a woman, a prostitute named Rahab, and stayed there. Hold up. When you read this, because like when I first read it, I was like, did these guys just literally go straight from where Joshua told them and went directly to the house of a prostitute? Because that's what it sounds like. But what's happening here is this is a house of ill repute, a house that everybody knew what was going on there. Like, no one's just sitting there and they're like, she doesn't have a husband and she doesn't work. Like, no one's sitting there saying, like, okay, we understand. Everybody knows what this house is doing. So why are the people of God going into the house of a harlot house? Now, if you're a stranger in enemy territory, which they were, and Jericho's on high alert, they're on high alert because they know Israel is coming in. So they've got soldiers, they've got sentries that are walking around, they're armed, and they're going to be looking for strangers. So if they were to be found, it'd be instant death, or at least like a prolonged torture to try to figure out what Israel's battle plans are, and then death. They know that knocking on every door is not in their best interest. Like, you can go knock on a door and they're like, hey, you don't look like me. Israel's just outside here. Maybe you're in Israel. I'm going to go alert someone. So knocking on every door, not an option. So if you're 2 travelers, though, where do you go to where it won't raise alarm that strange men are going into this house? If you're 2 travelers entering harlot house, you're not going to arouse any suspicion. Now, some people, we find out later that some people kind of like recognize that they were strangers, but you wouldn't arouse like any immediate danger right now, because you're going into a house where random guys would go into all the time, and it wouldn't be suspicious or anything like that. The king hears about this, that some Israelite men have entered the city. So the king, it's interesting because the assumption is, they're like, oh, well, they just heard people were in the city. Well, technically, it almost sounds like the king had heard that the men who entered the cities went into harlot house, because the king sends men directly to her house, and they're telling them to bring up the men that had entered. And this is what she says in chapter 2, verse 4. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. So she said, yes, the men did come to me, but I did not know where they were from. She's playing a really dangerous game right here, because if she had told them, oh yeah, they were here, she could have been tried for treason by not turning them in immediately. So yes, she's hiding them up in her roof, but what she says is, she's like, oh yeah, there were guys here. I didn't know they were Jewish. Like, I didn't know they were Israelites, but they left. So she's basically trying to save herself in this and not incriminate herself by saying, I didn't know where they were from. There were 2 guys in here, but I didn't know where they were from. And I mean, again, like, men are entering her house all the time. Is she going to stop and ask each one of them's genealogy? Like, so I guess that would make sense. But she goes a step further, and she says, at nightfall, when the gate was about to close, the men went out, and I don't know where they're going. Chase after them quickly, and you can catch up with them. I love just her enthusiasm. Now, she's flat out lying, and there are some people, as I was researching this and putting this together, there were some pastors that were like, there's sometimes that God will use a lie. And I'm like, no, bro, lying is lying. Like, first off, she's a Gentile. She knows nothing about living a life connected with God. She's a prostitute. I'm sure there was a lot of lying that was going on at that point in time. So she just did what she thought she was supposed to do. And yes, God will honor her, but he honors her because she was willing to put her life on the line to save these men and to provide them a way out and to give them direction. So never think that a lie, that you're supposed to lie and that God's going to use a lie. But she's flat out lying. I mean, it's an Academy Award-winning performance because a group of soldiers are sent outside the city gates to go to the Jordan River. That's exactly where Israel is. And it says as soon as these men go out the gate closes behind them. So they're not like, oh, we're going to leave the gate open. You guys just come back in whenever you feel it. No, they're like, no, we're closing the gate because we know the enemy's near. But they've heard, the thing is Jericho's on high alert because they have heard tell of what God has done for Israel. I mean, it's been a while. Yes, it's been over 40 years, but they still probably speak about what happened at the Red Sea. And when they cross over the Jericho, or when they cross over the Jordan River, Jericho's going to get a brief glimpse of that because God's going to part the waters there too. But they're terrified because of Israel, but yet they send men outside because Rahab just sold it right there. She's like, they just left. If you run, you can go catch them. So they're going after them. So she goes up to the roof, and she tells the spies how terrified Jericho is because of them. And it's because their God they already know. She's like, we already know God gave you this land. We already know that we're going to lose, so we're terrified of you. But then this is what she says in chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. Now please swear to me by the Lord that you will also show kindness to my family because I showed kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, all who belong to them, and save us from death. So this is basically her conversion. Because right before this, she acknowledges, she says, because I know that your God is the God of both heaven and earth. So she's basically converted at this point. Now people say, well, she never said a prayer. I'm going to pose that with the question, research it and get back to me. Any one of you who know this. What does Jesus tell the other thief on the cross after the thief acknowledges who Jesus is? He didn't say a prayer. He didn't go through that. Now, prayer is important, and we go through that as an affirmation, but Jesus says, this day you'll be with me in paradise. He doesn't say, bow your head and say this. I, state your name, am a sinner. He acknowledges who Jesus Christ is. He acknowledges that he's due the the thief is telling him, like, we're getting the rewards of what we've done. This man is innocent. He's done nothing, and they're killing him for it. And he says, this day you'll be with me in paradise. So her conversion is basically she is acknowledging that the God they serve is the God of heaven and earth. So if you're going to research that and say, like, someone get to me with some answers, if you're like, well, I don't believe that, I'm not quite sure about that, like, look it up and come back to me with that, okay? But she and the spies tell her, like, look, you've helped us, we're going to honor you, we're going to honor your family, like, we're going to save you. And then she lets them down through a window because her house is situated on the walls of Jericho. That's really important to understand. She lets them out of her window because her house is situated along the walls of Jericho. And then she lets them down and she gives them some advice. And this is in verse 16. This is important. Go to the hill country so that the men pursuing you won't find you. She said to them, hide yourself for 3 days until they return. Afterwards, go on your way. So she already knew that these men were going to be out for 3 days. How does she know that? Not only that, she tells the men, like, go the opposite direction of the men I sent you, and then hide on the hills because they're not going to go over there. But she says for 3 days. And they do what she says. Like, that's insane. First off, she's a woman. Secondly, she's a Gentile. Thirdly, she kind of takes the lowest position in society, and they're listening to her. But go back to a couple of verses, and God tells Joshua, tell Israel to prepare themselves for 3 days. So here, this Gentile prostitute, although completely against them, she's technically an enemy, speaks the very word of God out of a window, telling them, go hide for 3 days and then go over. Like, that's what God tells Joshua, that's what Joshua tells Israel, and that's what Rahab is telling the spies. Like, no matter who she is, she just spoke the very words of God to these two spies. Now, they probably already knew that. Like, well, we're supposed to wait. Like, well, we're going to come in 3 days. Like, we don't know if that happens. We know that they're up on the roof. And the narrative that happens is she tells them we're afraid. Then she tells them, I'm going to let you down. So this seems to be like an immediate reaction, that there's no conversation. There's nothing like that going. But she tells them, go and hide in the hills for 3 days and then cross over. And that's exactly what God told Joshua. So Israel, or the two spies, they go down. She ties a scarlet rope on her window just so that no one comes in and kills her and her family. And then the spies go and they tell Joshua, they're terrified of us. They are terrified, like we can walk in there and take it right now. So Israel crosses the Jordan by taking the Ark of the Covenant, and as the priest's feet touch the water, God separates the water to a great degree, and then they stand in the middle with the Ark of the Covenant, and then the men cross over that are going to do battle. And then Joshua circumcises all the men. Ouch. Why does he do that? Well, because there has been no circumcision happening since they left Egypt. All of the circumcised men have died off from that generation, because God says, like, that generation won't see the promised land. So they have to reestablish their covenant with God. Israel arrives at the wall of Jericho. Joshua has like the craziest war strategy ever. Instead of fighting, we're going to walk around the city once a day for 6 days. And we're going to shoot at them. We're going to throw rocks. We're going to fire arrows. No. We're just going to walk around in silence. All right. And then on the seventh day, we're going to do it 7 times. But after the 7th time, we're going to shout. We're going to blow our horns. But we're going to bring weapons, right? We're going to shout and blow our horns, and these walls are going to fall. They do it, and it happens. And then they walk in, and they start taking down the city. And it says in Joshua 2:17, it says, but the city and everything in it are set apart to the Lord for destruction. This is Joshua telling the army. Only Rahab the prostitute and everyone in her house will live because she hid the men we sent. After the victory, after they go in and they like the walls fall down, they start like fighting, Joshua tells the 2 spies, like, I want you to go get Rahab and her family. And they go in and they get her family, they take them outside, and they put them in a camp just outside of where Israel is encamping. then they go back to destroying the rest of the city. So it's like they go through this entire thing of sweeping through and kind of killing all the soldiers, like people that are going to be a threat to them. When it's safe enough, Joshua's like, okay, go get them and get them out of the city because I don't want them to have to see what we're about to do. And they get them out of the city, they put them in a little tent outside of Israel, and then they continue on with their destruction. And then Joshua 6:25 says, but Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's household, and all who belonged to her, because she hid them that day. She had hid the men Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho, and she lives in Israel to this day. We don't really hear that she dies. I mean, eventually we know she does, but her story goes into all of eternity because she has a son named Boaz. So here's 4 things that we can learn from the life of Rahab. God's purpose is not limited by your past. So Rahab, she lived a hard life. She was obviously very adept at lying. It's still a sin. She was Gentile. She lived set apart from God her whole life. Don't hold it against her, and it's not okay to sin. But she didn't let her past life stop her from asking for mercy. She's a Gentile. She's the enemy, and she already knows. She tells them, we already know God has given you this land. We already know this. But what she asked for was impossible at that time. It was sanctuary. Were these spies able to grant her sanctuary? No. Joshua was. But the spies go back and they tell Joshua what she did and what she asked for. Joshua tells the army, you're not to touch this house. So she didn't let it stop. She leaves it, or she lives in the land that God has been sworn to give to Israel. Maybe sometimes we're too timid thinking about how badly we used to live. We're too timid in asking God for things because we're like, well, this is what I did in my life. This is how I lived. Or I've been here before and I've kind of walked away before. Like, I don't want to ask for too much. Maybe you're just too timid because you're limiting yourself by your past. You're limiting your request by your past. And I heard testimony today that it was someone that did not allow their past, did not allow what they were looking at to stop them from stepping forward and saying, no, I'm going to ask God for this. I'm going to sit here and ask God. I'm going to follow what I'm told. And God moved in a miraculous way. God's purpose is not limited by your past. Rahab saved herself, her mother, her father, her brothers, anyone who was in her house because she asked despite her past. Number 2, face adversity with faith. When these 2 spies show up at her door, she doesn't hesitate to let them in and hide them and protected them from the king, which would have cost her life. But she knew that these men represented the God that she knew was going to be victorious. Even when they leave, like imagine this, when they leave, she has to have faith in saying like, okay, they're on their way. They're going to be marching, and it's not a march of peace. They're coming to destroy the city. So she had to hold to the word of 2 spies that had no authority to grant her sanctuary, just on the fact that she believed it was God. She asked for sanctuary for all in her family, and she had faith in what these 2 men said. Yes. And then when they go down, like they get out the window and they're like, oh, hey, by the way, if you tell people we were here, we're not held by your promise, okay? Like we're not held to that promise. But she gets what she needs because she had faith. Imagine her house is at the walls of Jericho. When things are falling down, when crumbling, I've heard people in wartime, it's not quiet. It's very loud. I'm sure they can hear screaming. I'm sure they can hear all this. And the family's huddled together in this house, and it's her faith that says, but they're going to spare us. Whatever you're facing, don't forget what's inside you is far greater than what you can see or hear. Her faith was far greater than anything she could see or she could hear. God keeps and fulfills all of his promises. Never let fear overcome your faith. You know that you're not facing this alone. Number 3, which ties into that, God protects others for your sake. There are people that are surrounded in your life right now that God is providing protection for simply because they're associated with you. Everyone who was in Rahab's, it doesn't say, it says everyone that was in her house. was spared death because of Rahab. So mother, father, brothers, sisters, children, herself, could have been anyone in that house was spared simply because she had the faith, simply because she was the one who honored these men. I hear it all the time. There are people like, oh yeah, I almost got T-boned the other day. Or like, oh man, if I didn't normally what I do is I push forward, but I was sitting in the car and I'm like, no, not today. And I almost got T-boned and blah, blah, blah. And people are just saying stuff like, oh man, it was so crazy. This almost happened to me. God's protecting them because of you. Fourth, you have been redefined through salvation. Here Rahab is listed even up into the last verse as a prostitute. They're like, that was your occupation. That's who you were. That's what you did. But as you read through Matthew's first chapter, she's named in the lineage of Christ. You may have done what the enemy says you've done. You may have been what the enemy says you were. But through Christ, you have been redefined as a child of God. It says she was adopted into Israel. So she was a Gentile, but through adoption, she's an Israelite. She's associated with the people of God simply because she was adopted into it. You are now counted as one who walks in line with Jesus Christ. So I just find it incredibly crazy that, that she falls in Jesus' lineage despite what she was, when there are people that lived much holier lives that aren't named in his lineage. But I just found it incredibly interesting of the things that we can learn from the life of Rahab. So that's all we have for Biblical Bios for that. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Don't forget that you can continue to support this ministry, this move of God, this church, with your tithes, offerings, your love gifts, your prayers, and your praise reports. Hearing that kind of stuff, when someone texts me and tells me, Pastor, you're never going to believe it. They tell me this, that pumps me up so much, because it's amazing to see that every prayer that has been said has been honored. That there's a reason for these things that happen. It's just amazing to hear it, to see it, and to know that God is still moving through people's lives. So keep them coming, but you can give via, you can do it on your smartphone with the Easy Tithe app that you can find in the Google Store or the iStore or Google Play. You can also find it on your desktop. If you're giving that way, go to easytithe.com. You can download the app. You can also go to praisechapelfresno.com, click Give in the menu bar. It's going to take you over to a third-party website. You can give through there. Or if you're joining us on our in-person campus, we have tithes and offering envelopes behind each and every one of our chairs with our tithes and offerings box located just outside the sanctuary. You can drop it off in. If you're joining us on our online campus only, you continue to mail in. We'll make sure it gets deposited. If you don't know our mailing address, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California. You'll see it. Get it in here. We'll get it deposited in a timely manner. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. We love each and every one of you. Don't forget Sunday service coming up, 10 o'clock. I'm just so pumped from this revival that I've got 10 different ideas that I'm I'll just mash them into one and we'll do one massive service. But I'll calm myself down with a peace beyond my own understanding. So just text people. Something's happening in the church. God is moving in such an amazing way through individual lives, through this corporate body. Bring people closer to the fire. Yes, they can listen to it. Yes, they can see it and hear it. But to be part of it, to be in it, is something altogether completely different and changes lives. But we love you guys. Start texting people. Don't stop texting them until you see them walk through those doors and give their life to Christ. We love you. We'll see you Sunday.